Good morning, church. We are nearly at the end of our Waymaker series that finishes at Easter, so we've got a few more people to go. I don't know about you, but I've really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to look at various Waymakers in the Bible, Old Testament and New, see how their influential life made a way and pioneered and pushed through for God in some really incredible, really bold, really courageous ways. Today's Waymaker is Timothy. And one of the reasons why I think he's a good example of being a waymaker is his steadiness and his service and his support. He wasn't always what you would identify as a really obvious waymaker. It wasn't that he did anything really bold and really out there, but it was that he was faithful, and it was that he plodded along, and it was that he made a way in those occasions too. You know, one of the interesting things about waymakers is we've been defining it as someone or something that makes a way, that pushes through, that's a pioneer, etc. But I believe that there's something else about waymakers too, that waymakers aren't always the most obvious people, but waymakers are the people that are the continuers. They continue the way, and that qualifies them too. You know, they're not always starters, but they are people that continue in the race and keep going. And for Timothy, that was very much the case. He was mentored by Paul, and as the early church started to grow and emerge and arise, Timothy was often following in the footsteps of Paul, being encouraged by Paul in his writings to him and in his letters to him to continue doing what it was that Paul had asked him to do. And in that respect, and by my understanding, that qualifies him to be a waymaker. You see, the thing is as we've been going through this series, I wonder if lots of us in church have thought, you know, there's no way I could be a Deborah, there's no way I could be a Peter, there's no way I could be a Joshua, so on and so forth. But waymakers are people that often coming off the back of the initial waymaker and just continuing faithfulness and continuing service, continuing support and continuing steadiness. So those three S's are things that we're going to look at today through the life of Timothy: service, support and steadiness. So Timothy was actually the first second-generation Christian mentioned in the New Testament. That in itself shows the importance of what he did, that he was a person that took on the mandate of responsibility to continue in the Christian life and continue in the Christian message. And as a second-generation Christian, he was taking it really, really seriously to be able to live a life according to God and to continue to live a life in kingdom responsibility. And as he took that responsibility seriously, as we've already said, that in essence made him qualified to be a waymaker as well. So as I mentioned earlier on, he was mentored by Paul, he was risen up by Paul, most likely received the word through Paul as well in Paul's early missionary trips. His story starts in Acts 16. I'm just going to read out a few verses of that now. So Acts 16 says, Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived. His mother was Jewish and a believer, and his father was Greek. And the believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Paul wanted to take him along on the journey, so he circumcised him because of the Jews who lived in that area, for all they knew of that was his father was Greek. And as they travelled from town to town, they delivered the decisions reached by the apostles and elders in Jerusalem for the people to obey. So the church is strengthened in faith and grew daily in numbers. So you see here, as Timothy is introduced to us, that he was an incredibly pivotal part of the early church. And actually, as he was risen in faith by Paul, there were those that spoke credibly of him, and there were those that really wanted to give him opportunity. But you also see that there were obstacles against him too. You see that there were obstacles against him because of his race. You see in other letters that Paul wrote to him that there were obstacles against him because of his youth. And you also see in letters that are written to him obstacles against him because of his timidness. And those three areas are ones that maybe some of us come under as well. We may feel that we're timid. We may feel like, we could never take the stage. We may feel like we don't have the qualifications, that we're not in the right age bracket, that there are many different things against us to stop us from making a way for God. And Timothy is actually a really great example that beyond timidness, beyond age, beyond fear, beyond race, actually every single one of us is called to make a way for God. And if we take seriously the responsibility for being disciples of Christ, we are asked to go and we are asked to do God's work. Probably one of the most famous verses that we see here written by Paul to Timothy was that in 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, which says, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith and in purity. And actually those words are challenging words for any single one of us to live by. That God is clearly saying through Paul, it's not about your age, it's not about your timidness, it's not about your race, it's not about where you come from. Don't let your circumstances dictate what you can do for God. Make a way for God, make a way for Jesus in this world and trust him, because how you are made is unique. So that's a really important thing for you to know about the life of Timothy, that he was strong in service, and that as Paul gave him more and more opportunities in the early church, he was responsive to that. And you see in the verses that we've just read that the churches were strengthened in faith and that they grew daily in numbers, and that was because people like Timothy, regardless of what they thought about themselves and the circumstances of their life, were ready to serve. I wonder what that looks like for us. Are we ready to serve despite our circumstances? Are we ready to serve despite our struggles of our identity? What are we doing in church life at the moment? What are we doing in our communities? How are we serving our families? How are we serving this world? And saying, actually, we want to make a way. We may not be the obvious way makers. We might not do anything as bold or as unique as some of the way makers we've looked at, yet they will still be incredibly influential things. The second S I want to look at is support. You see all the way through Timothy's life when he pops in and out of scripture that he's fiercely loyal to his leader. His leader was Paul, and what was asked of Timothy was a lot. But you see all the way through in many different verses that we'll look at now that you actually see that there was a real faithfulness that was over Timothy's understanding. There was a faithfulness in terms of how it was that he was going to live out his God call. Paul says in Philippians 2 verse 20, he's referring to Timothy, he says, I know no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, but not that of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proven himself, because as a son with his father, he has served me in the work of the gospel. A wonderful relationship that even though they weren't biologically related, they refer to each other as son and as father. And you see here that, Timothy so desired to support Paul, his spiritual father, that he would do anything. And I wonder what that looks like for us. How are we being supportive to our leaders? How are you being supportive to me? How are you being supportive to the leaders of Connect Church or the leaders that are in your world, your bosses, your workplaces? To make a way for God is also sometimes just to stand behind those that are also making a way and to cheer them on and to push them through. And as has been said many times before, I'm not the sole answer for Connect Church, and there's lots of help that I need. And when we're talking about being waymakers, sometimes it's not just about what we do, but it's also about how we support and facilitate other people's visions as well. 1 Thessalonians says, now we ask you, brothers and sisters, to acknowledge those who work hard among you, who care for you and who teach you. God is looking for people that will make a way by supporting leadership and by supporting those that rise up amongst them. And I need your support. As Connect Church leaders, we need your support as well. We cannot do all this alone on our own. So in terms of support, what are you doing to make a way for others and their visions? How are you supporting other people as they are boldly going out? And what does that look like for you to make a way and honour leaders that are around you? And finally, a steadiness. I think that's what you really see here within Timothy's life too, that he was willing to go on mission consistently, that he often put himself in quite difficult environments where he was called to troubleshoot and go into areas for God where things weren't always that easy at all. But you see all the way through his life a steadiness. And one of the final words that Paul imparted to him are found in 1 Timothy verse 6. And it says, but you, man of God, flee from all of this. This is referring to money and false teaching before. But it says, flee from all of this. Pursue righteousness, pursue godliness, pursue faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight. Take hold of eternal life, for which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Timothy had a steadiness about him, and that's what helped him to continue to make a way for God. And it's that same steadiness that every single one of us needs as well. You know, making a way isn't always about the quick, let's just do it and do something really impactful and then just not go on and do anything else for God for a long time. There's a steadiness too that comes over what we can do for God, and just gradually continuing to pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness are what will help us continue to be those people that will make a way for God, who will shine brightly Jesus' love. So what do those words look like to you? How are you steadily pursuing righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness? And if we are doing all those things, believe me, I think we'll be making more of a way than any of us can possibly imagine. So service, support, and steadiness are just some of the lessons that Timothy can teach us. And I encourage you to grasp hold of those today. And why not in your spare time this week, do your own character study of his life and consider yourself that although he wasn't the most obvious of waymakers, through how he lived and through what he did, he made a difference to the early church that has changed how we think and what we do forever. So have a great week, and I'll see you all soon.